There's no room for discrimination of any kind. In our country, it is the values that our country needs to stand for. It's the values, obviously, that we stand for here at PayPal, and we'll do whatever we need to stand up. I know of no one who's made their career in making these principal stands than Alphonso.
So I am from Liberia, West Africa. I grew up there. I was born here in the United States, and my parents were in the US for school. My father went to Georgetown and Howard. My mother went to school in Virginia. They had me. About a year old, my parents left and went back to Liberia. And they were not planning on staying in the US and wanted to go home. They returned home. My father then made a decision he was going to run for office. And my uncle also decided to run for office, and they both won. So my uncle became the president of Liberia, and my father became the mayor of Monrovia, the first elected mayor of Monrovia. In the past, mayors had been appointed. So I lived quite a privileged life for a long time. And then everything changed in 1980. My uncle was assassinated and my father was put in prison. And there was a military coup, and we were placed under house arrest, and we couldn't leave the house. And so we lived under house arrest for close to 3 years. And my father was in prison for 18 months, and when he was released, he came back to the house. We had to leave our home, and we were under house arrest in another house. And he sought asylum here in the US. And he was initially denied asylum a few times, and either a light bulb went off or someone told him, but he went back to the embassy and said, I have 2 children that are US citizens, and we need to get them out. And so the US government said yes. And I remember thinking, having this incredibly alienating experience of coming to a new place, or at least for me, although I was born here, was foreign for me, and being considered the other. And so I overcame some of those challenges, went to law school in Philadelphia, clerked for a federal judge, worked at a major law firm in Philadelphia. I then moved to Los Angeles to run a company, an addiction treatment center. Fred Siegel and a few other shareholders had recruited me to run this company for them. And I thought, why not? This is a challenge to create a company from ground up. So I did that. And then Lawrence versus Texas happened. And I remember reading that case and thinking, it's time. It's time to do what I've always wanted to do, which is really ensure that democracy and fairness and equality really mean something. And it means something for the most marginalized people. I saw this as an opportunity to really bring this concept of equality for all, justice for all, alive. And for the most marginalized people, people that don't have voices. And so that's why I took the role.
Where do you see the state of play right now? What are the things you're working on, and what are the things that we should be thinking about in terms of just continuing to fight for this concept of equality, non-discrimination?
I made a point both to the board and to the staff that I wanted to focus on issues that affect people who are multiply marginalized.
Yeah.
What that means is someone who is Black, HIV positive, lives in the South, no access to health care. Latinx immigrant seeking persecution in her country and is trying to live in this country. The reason why I want to do that is because people who are multiply marginalized are, in most cases, the most disadvantaged, because all of their identities are an affront to the current systems. So we are launching an initiative that is basically 4 components: employment, skills building, capacity building, creating task forces or summits in the states where there's high violence, and then creating an education outreach campaign. I'm also launching a litigation initiative, impact litigation globally, because I think we have to care about our siblings that live outside of the US. Equality doesn't stop at our borders. And then finally, the Corporate Equality Index, which you score very well on every single year. We are expanding globally because I want to make sure that if your employee is interested in transferring to another office, that the policies and the practices that exist here in New York are also going to exist in Nairobi, are also going to exist in Tokyo, are also going to exist in Bogota. And for multinational companies, we need to make sure that these policies are not just unique to the US. So we will be expanding the Corporate Equality Index. And it's a huge success story. When we started in 2002, only 13% of the Fortune 500 companies had top scores. This year, 686, including PayPal, was listed as one of the top scores.
You mentioned sort of a litany of issues that people have today, especially marginalized communities. But one of them that you didn't mention, but one that we're really focused on, and I know you think about this a lot, is the financial health of the communities. And there's so many underserved communities. I mean, it's something like almost 2/3 of Americans struggle to make ends meet at the end of the month. 2/3 that are thinking about that. By the way, we've seen this inside of PayPal, and we've just tried to take some real impactful action against that. And it really is part and parcel of what our mission is about. How do we drive financial health to those who most need it? How do we make sure that people aren't being left behind, especially as we move towards a digital economy and that kind of thing? What are the efforts you're making around that? How do you think about that? How might we be helpful in that as you think about the financial health of the communities that you're serving?
We talked briefly about the existing systems and whether or not those systems work.
Yeah.
For many people, they don't. I remember years ago opening up my first checking account. You need to have a minimum balance. And if you don't have a minimum balance, then we will charge you. And for people that can't afford to have a minimum balance, that means they don't have a checking account.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a checking account, that means it's much more difficult for them to get an apartment, much more difficult for them to pay a utility bill. And so the systems that currently exist in most cases are all tied together in a way that does not affect the disenfranchised or affects negatively affects the disenfranchised and the marginalized. So what we're doing at the Human Rights Campaign is trying to make sure that we explore new avenues for financial literacy, but also thinking about how we can get people the information that they need. Services like the ones that you provide, where they can see another way of managing their finances. You don't only have to think about a banking institution as the only financial institution that will help you govern your finances. So we need to talk about financial literacy a lot more, and we need to make sure people understand the alternatives to the traditional financial institutions.